Chapter 1 of the Campbell Concepts and Connections book is kind of an introductory chapter. It covers a little bit of a lot of things. Some of this information will be dealt with in more detail in other chapters, and some of it will be dealt with in more detail in Biology 1409. Now, the notes of the book correspond with the notes that you're given correspond with the sections in your book, section 1.1, 1.2, and so on and so forth. Now, the first section discusses properties of life. What makes life different from non-life? Well, living things are ordered, they're complex, living things reproduce, living things grow and develop. Now, this, of course, is controlled by the genetic code, the DNA. Living things have to take in and utilize energy. That's why we need calories. Living things respond to changes in their environment. Living things have homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is an internal balance or steady state, keeping the body as constant as possible on the inside. And living things adapt. Now, adaptation is different from response. Adaptation occurs on the level of the population, the so-called survival of the fittest type thing, whereas response is something an individual will do. Now, in the next section, 1.2, it talks about organizational levels of life. In other words, there are levels of biology, there are levels of life. The molecular level, such as proteins, DNA, and so forth. The cell. All living things are made of cells. Cells are grouped into tissues. A tissue is a group of similar cells. Tissues are arranged into organs. An organ is a structure made of tissues bundled together, perform specific functions. The next level is organ system. An organ system is a group of organs coordinated to achieve a vital body function. All of this combined makes up the individual living thing, which is the organism. Organisms are grouped into populations. A population is a group of individuals of the same species in an area. A community is a group of populations of different species in an area. The ecosystem includes the community plus its environment, and all of this put together is the biosphere. Now, some of this, especially the more ecological topics, we will discuss in Biology 1409. The next section of the chapter is cell theory. Cell theory is the concept that we now take for granted, but took about 200 years to develop since the discovery of the microscope. Cell theory is this. The cell is the basic unit of life. All living things are made of cells, and cells come from other cells through cell division. Also in this section, the book describes the differences between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are cells that do not have a membrane-bound nucleus or organelles. Eukaryotic cells, however, do have a membrane-bound nucleus and organelles. Examples of prokaryotes include bacteria and archaea, also known as archaebacteria. Eukaryotes include plants, animals, fungi, and protists. That's under cell theory. Now, short discussion in your notes on the unity of life. That is, all living things have certain things in common, such as the properties of life, the use of DNA, the genetic code, basic metabolic pathways, so on and so forth. But the diversity of life, section 1.6, there are about 1.8 million species of organisms that have been discovered so far. And all of them can be grouped into three major groups called the domains. So you need to look in that section in your book. The three domains are bacteria, archaea, and the eukaryotes. And each of those are divided into their kingdoms. Now, we don't cover a lot of taxonomy in Biology 1408. We save some of that for 1409, but this just discusses the diversity of life. Now, sections 1.8 and 1.9 discuss science as a process. Science is a way of knowing the physical aspects of nature. It's a way of knowing why plants are green. It's a way of knowing how photosynthesis works. It's a way of knowing what air is made of, all kinds of things. Now, to make a long story short, we can discuss the scientific method. Okay? You always start with an observation that lends itself to a question. If science is about getting answers, you got to first ask a question before you get an answer. Now, then you form a hypothesis. You know that a hypothesis is an educated guess, but what are you guessing? You're guessing the answer to your question. It's a tentative answer to your question. Now, you can make a prediction based on this hypothesis. If my hypothesis is true, then I predict that such and such will happen. Okay? But for science, you can't leave it at that. You have to put it to the test. Testing the hypothesis with experiments, with gathering data, with observations. You test hypotheses with data. Okay? When you get in your data, you record, analyze your data, you have your results, and you reach a conclusion. Either your data support your hypothesis, meaning that it's consistent with your original statement, or it refutes your hypothesis or contradicts it. So that's kind of how science works in a roundabout sort of way. Now, in your book, it also mentions the word hypothesis and the word theory. The word theory means different things in different contexts. In the scientific context, it means something different from what you ordinarily hear in other contexts. So, hypothesis, it's a tentative answer, it's specific, it's kind of narrow in scope, and it's subject to be tested. But a scientific theory is a broader, more explanatory idea that has a large amount of scientific support. Now, when I say scientific support, I'm referring to hypotheses that have been supported over and over and over again that point in the same direction. Examples, cell theory, for example, is one example of a scientific theory. Theory of gravity, and some others. And that's the conclusion of our brief review of Chapter 1.